We have one last session before lunch, ladies and gentlemen. I'm looking forward to this very much. Purpose has been at the heart of FinTech since its emergence, but to what extent can we say that companies in the sector not only talk the talk, but walk the walk? Interested in the context of some of the announcements we just heard from the FCA. Do any of them, or do many of them, deliver positive outcomes for people and the planet? So, let me introduce our panel to discuss this. Please welcome to the stage Graham Cressey, who's a Senior Manager in Strategy and Consulting, Banking and FinTech at Accenture. Emma Kisby, who's CEO for the UK and EU at Cogo. Alex Craven, co-founder of the Data City, and Kim Abbott, founder and CEO of Vested. Well, welcome all of you. As I say, what a good bit of timing that the FCA was on before us, and we can talk a little bit about greenwashing for sure. But welcome first of all, and I think we should start by defining what sort of FinTech for good really means today, and also I think kind of what you all do. So if we can just go along the line and give us an answer to that question, but just set out your stall a little bit for the audience and tell us what you do. So Alex.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Graham. I run the FinTech lab for Accenture in the UK. We've got 150 alumni. It's an accelerator program that runs each year. Really enjoy doing it. And for me, impact is about going beyond just the size of FinTech and the funding and so on, and it's about actually what does it do? What does it get you? Does it do something meaningful and helpful for society, for people, for planet?
And you've worked with quite a few of your colleagues here on the panel, haven't you?
Very proud to have done so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kim, over to you. What do you do?
So hi, my name's Kim. I'm the CEO and founder of Vested Impact. We're a data company that assesses the outward impact that companies have. So when we talk about what's the true impact, to us it's not just about looking at companies that behave well and that might internally have their house in order, but actually what is that impact that their products and services have outwardly on all the social issues that matter to us and to the world. And we do that through loads of data, AI, and things that I'm sure we'll get into later.
Fantastic. Emma?
I'm Emma. I'm the CEO of Cogo. Cogo creates personalised carbon footprints for individuals and small businesses. So our solution analyses spending information and gives personalised insights and recommendations to help people to reduce their carbon emissions.
And you work basically giving that information now to a lot of banks, don't you?
We are very lucky to have worked with Graham and the Accenture lab, and we are working with about 16 of the world's leading banks to surface our feature within their mobile banking experience.
Fabulous. And then last but not least, Alex Craven.
Hi, so I'm Alex Craven, co-founder of the Data City. We're a data business. We provide new industrial classifications for sectors not covered by the industrial classification system. So we map, amongst others, FinTech for Innovate Finance, but also things like clean tech, green tech, and this quite new and exciting area of overlapping FinTech and green tech solutions.
So this session, I really want to sort of dig into a little bit about what people really do, whether or not it really is doing good. And I also just want to note for you guys, we have got the opportunity for question and answer from you as well. So if you want to, towards the end, if you want to sort of stick your hand up and get involved, we'd love to hear from you. But let's just sort of, if I can turn to you, Graham, first, and sort of say, okay, right. We said at the beginning, you know, purpose has been at the heart of FinTech. Is that true? Do you feel that there is that in the culture of the FinTech firms you've worked with?
Yes, absolutely. So the way we found that is we work with a number of clients of Accenture who tell us what their problems are. And a few years ago it was, what's purpose? Like they all wanted to say it, a bit like the FCA are talking about now, but what was the real thing that was going on behind that? So then we find the FinTechs that address that. And the work that we've been doing with Kim at Vested now is about, well, where are these FinTechs having some impact? And we are genuinely seeing that they do. So whether it's on climate, or whether it's inclusion, or whether it's in kind of getting better access for people, the FinTechs are genuinely leading the way on that. And we can talk to various examples, but yeah, we think that they are, and the real power then is, well, can we scale that impact?
Yeah. So what are you finding, Kim, then?
So I think financial services has always been a very high impact industry. I mean, the economy and everything that surrounds it I come from the development world, so my background is actually working for the UN and building their data platforms to assess and monitor their impact. But fundamentally, how we finance and what we finance and access to finance massively impacts nearly every kind of sustainable development goal that happens. But what we've noticed is over time, social issues change. And this is the most important thing, is changes happen in the world, and if companies can't adapt, they're all of a sudden not potentially serving or having that impact that they used to. And that's the incredible thing we've seen with FinTech, is that their ability, they might be quite narrow focused, but that ability to focus on where those needs are most needed, by whom, where, with what kind of solutions, is where it really shines. And I think that's that unique position to go, they are solving a problem that maybe has emerged or might become a future, and then again, to Graham's point, the bigger question then becomes, how do we do more of it? How do we scale that, whether that's within the UK or globally as well?
Well, obviously, Emma, you're a great example of somebody who has scaled what you do hugely through your work with the banks. But just let's go back a step. What was it you were trying to achieve when you set Cogo up?
Yeah, so 4 years ago when open banking came in, we started to play around with sustainability data and spending information and how you could actually map data to help people understand the impact of their spend on people and planet. And we started off working with the Living Wage Foundation data, showing people the percentage of their spend on living wage businesses. And it was really engaging, but unfortunately not many businesses pay the real living wage. But what there was a real appetite was for people understanding their carbon footprints. So we started working with Mike Berners-Lee about how we could match carbon emission data with spending data. And overconsumption, as you probably well know from the IPCC report, is one of the biggest drivers of the climate crisis. How do we actually match that data and help people to understand their own personal, individual impact, or small businesses, and then give them recommendations that are going to have a material difference? And that's how we came about. We got a great reaction. We had about 50,000 people download our app. We were delighted as a team of 5. But then we were like, oh God, we're here to save the planet, and actually 50,000 people probably aren't going to do that. So we started to look at actually how do we find scale, and how do we go where the consumers are checking on their spending, rather than us pulling consumers to us. And that's how we started working with the banks. So we are very privileged. But what I would say is we needed a bank to take a risk with us because we were a new FinTech. So we were very innovative, but we can't do it by ourselves. And we had one bank, and then we were able to build from there. So that collaboration that Graham talked about is so important because, yeah.
So what are consumers seeing then? What are they able to access? How does it work?
So essentially, if you've got a NatWest bank account, you can go and download the Cogo app. You can see your transactional spend. Every transaction you make, every spend has a carbon emissions attached to it. And then it shows you where your carbon hotspots are and actually gives you some recommendations, whether that's energy or it could be your fashion footprint. Depending on where your spending bias is, it will give you a personalised recommendation.
And can you see if people's behaviour are changing?
Yeah, we can. And we do kind of short-term pilots where we look at people engaging. Carbon literacy is a big challenge. People don't really understand the concept of their everyday spend as a material impact. So you can see the short-term impact, but also the longer term, things like, your home renovations to make sure it's energy efficient. That doesn't happen overnight. Buying an EV takes time. But there are small impacts we can take to our diet or just our fashion consumption that makes a big difference.
Yeah. So Alex, in your world then, in terms of mapping where the good guys are working and so on, what findings have you got to share with us?
So there's a sort of new wave of companies I think sit right at that intersection between green tech and FinTech. There was one I spoke at an event a couple of weeks ago called Cuppa, and her concept is that you can put your postcode in and you get a personalised decarbonisation plan for your home. And the reason that's a FinTech product is because ultimately what it does is it tells you, based on your lifestyle and whether you've got electric cars and all the rest of it, what your solar versus air source heat pump versus all the battery, all the other bits that you might need, insulation, and gives you that plan, which is obviously a massive outlay. So that relates to a lending product, which makes it a FinTech, or a service for financial services companies, and there's a whole, I think, opportunity there for organisations to innovate. And she's relating that through to the long-term return on that investment, the savings in energy bills, as well as the reduction of your carbon footprint. So there's loads of these new and innovative companies popping up, and there's a huge opportunity, I think, for established businesses. Exactly your story, I think. The innovation is out there. the major financial institutions and the well-established FinTechs just need to go and find them and give them access to customers. It's exactly that, you know, spend money with them, back them financially, network them, introduce them to their customers. And that would be a huge impact and very measurable.
Yeah. I mean, on the greenwashing front, especially as I say, the FCA making their announcement about their desire to kind of stop that as much as possible. I mean, Kim, from your point of view at Vested, how much does that happen, do you think? I mean, as I say, it's one thing to say the world has changed and sometimes you might have had a good intention and now it's not quite so appropriate, but I think we're talking more about the getting on the bandwagon bit, aren't we?
So I think it'd be fair to say it's a bit of an alphabet soup at the moment, right? And you might feel like you need a PhD to navigate all the different terms, and what to measure is the question we get, being a data platform that measures it. And I can't help but think sometimes if we just need to pause for a moment and ask ourselves, are we measuring what matters? Because that, to me, is the number one reason we do all of this and any of this is to benefit society and human lives. So if we aren't measuring the data, and if what we're claiming or saying isn't linked to that, then we're probably missing the point altogether. And one thing that we work on big, which is a lot of companies, I mentioned earlier, you know, they kind of tend to look in-house very well. And then they'll tend to do, a good example is they'll tend to do a report that says, great, we delivered 2 million mobile subscriptions to customers, that's our impact. That's not impact. That's their output.
Yeah.
The impact is how has those 2 million mobile subscriptions changed access to affordable internet, access to mobile banking, all those things that come with it. And that's when you get the human impact in the human lives. And so we leverage 100 million data points to kind of make that attribution for people. But for me, the fundamental thing is to ask when you read this data or you read these claims, is it measuring what matters? Because if it doesn't feel right, generally isn't right, is what we've noticed.
And then what are you doing with your findings? How is that impacting? Who are you working with?
Yeah, so we work as well with financial institutions for the same reason Emma said actually was, as I said, I came from the development world and people were very much like, you're dancing with the devil, working with the financing sector, but the world is short $3 trillion at least a year, enough money to come close to even getting close to solving poverty, climate, migration. So the only place that kind of money exists is here. So we sell that data. We work with financial institutions to understand the true impact of where they allocate their money so that they can make those decisions, because it's not just about social issues that are interconnected, which means you can't just, many of them say to us, we're just focusing on climate right now. Well, I hate to break it to you, but you can't just focus on climate because, you know, the world's largest carbon sink is actually the ocean. So you might want to look at that, and you might want to, it's all interconnected. So we give them that whole picture of impact so that they can make decisions based then on their own strategies or their clients' needs. But it is just about giving them the data, the science-based evidence, so that they can make better decisions.
Have you got some good examples of where that's happened?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few. It does, the greatest examples we see are actually in the FinTech and the startup space, of startups who our data might assess them and tell them they have a phenomenal product that delivers value. It's solving an incredibly important problem, but it's actually not targeting the right people, because the place is important. A mobile phone has a vastly different impact here in the UK than it would in Uganda. The same would apply to loans and that, right? So what we've seen is companies that genuinely say to us, wow, so we could have a bigger impact if we just change this little thing. And that's where I think we've seen the most promising impact. And then, of course, yes, we've worked with financial institutions where they've assessed billions of dollars. And whilst we can't often track the decision they've made on where they've then allocated the financing, that's the goal.
Yeah. So Graham, when you're there at Accenture looking at all these fantastic young companies coming through your lab program, how do you assess their impact, their positive impact, or their potential impact?
So we start primarily from what the enterprises are looking to solve, because there needs to be a market fit there, and there needs to be a need at the end of it. And I think sometimes the FinTechs will think they've found the need, but they haven't always. So when we're assessing it, we tend not to focus so much on whether the FinTech itself is having the impact, but whether it's meeting the need that the client, the enterprise client, is trying to solve for. But we recognize that the industry isn't right. So one of the things from an impact point of view that we look at is diversity and inclusion. So we recognize that the founder ratios are not equal yet. We recognize that financial services doesn't serve everybody yet. And that was partly why we wanted to do the piece here, which was around, well, actually, we need to focus on impact, not just on revenue generating and profit generating and things like that.
When you're dealing with startups, though, I mean, are you finding yourself, as indeed, they're probably asking themselves the same question. You know, they have to provide a product which works well and that actually is going to be economically viable. You know, how does that balance work with the purpose piece?
Yeah, so that's where the partners need to work together. So we would say that as the lab, we curate the ecosystem. So we don't invest in the startups, we don't charge anyone to be part of the lab program, but what it really needs is the great creatives to bring their ideas. It needs the enterprises with the scale to come to the party with what they're trying to solve. But then it can't just be about, well, we want to buy that FinTech. It has to be about, well, that's an amazing founder, or that's a fantastic idea, but it needs to be molded. We need to help them get off the ground. And the talk at the beginning was all about collaboration and helping the ecosystem thrive and coming out with optimism. I think that's kind of the call to action, really, is like you've got to see the sparks, but you've also got to then help them turn into something.
Yeah. I mean, Alex, how do you think the companies that you're studying get that balance right between behaving well and doing, you know, their stated aim of being a green tech, for example, but also being a legitimately good business?
I think a lot of them are very early on in that conversation.
Yeah.
I think the greenwashing thing needs to be confident enough to start with a statement of intent and resist the pressure to overpromise. Because I think that's the honesty of the conversation. Because, you know, we work in FinTech, right? We work with data. Our biggest impact is the cost of data centers. You know, and what really needs to happen, none of us can make a meaningful statement about decarbonisation, for instance. We can do stuff on inclusion and diversity, and we should absolutely crack on with that. But what we need to be doing is saying we are going to shift our hosting infrastructure spend to clean hosting infrastructure providers who are renewables, you know, powered. And there's a whole new thinking that needs to be put in, systems thinking around where is a data centre, where is its local renewables generation plant and battery solution. And these things need to be joined up. So there's all this innovation.
How far down the path are we on that?
Very early, but
Yeah.
there is some. Some of the first actual commissions in this space are being pushed through. But for instance, we've had a ban on onshore wind for 15 years. So we need to get rid of that planning restriction. And there's a really good story here from a levelling up perspective. You know, you wouldn't do that in central London, but you definitely would in the east coast of Yorkshire, where I'm from. But that needs, you know, all of the pipes, from a grid and connectivity point of view, sorting out to enable it to happen. So there's lots of stuff we can do, you know, just needs the will. Part of the job of FinTech and us is huge shifts of capital, right? It's the funding for that. What we need is consistency of economic policy, a commitment from UK government to the green agenda, so that the capital can move with confidence to fund this type of, you know, I think the estimate is £1 trillion worth of investment in the UK to meet our net zero obligations.
Yeah.
And FinTech's biggest one would be this decarbonisation of data.
Which brings me on to the role of regulation, actually, very neatly. Thanks for that. Which is how much more structure in the regulatory system do you think would be useful? I mean, do you want people to be told they have to be greener in the FinTech world?
Ideally, Kate, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think from my perspective, one of the challenges that we find, we started the business 15 years ago, and we were very lonely as a business. You know, we had this great idea, and open banking really transformed that. In the last year, competitors are popping up all over the place, which is brilliant because it validates that we're kind of got a good solution, but it's creating a lot of confusion. So people are like, how are you measuring this? What are you doing this? We need to create a standard around how we measure. And then everyone knows what's in, what's out, you know, what this means. And then we can actually start competing around how do you engage? How do you wrap financial solutions around these things? That's where we should be competing, not on the definitions of what we mean when we say net zero, climate positive. You know, we just need a standard.
Yeah. You're nodding, Kim.
Yeah, I think too, it's funny, Emma and I have had these discussions before because we sit on the fence also that regulation isn't the silver bullet, however, because it is never fast enough and never goes far enough. You know, and like I say, I talk from the space of going, it's not just about climate, it's about the broader issues. So we also can't wait. And I think even the room we're in today, the phrase that, you know, we can't let the pursuit of perfection be the enemy of progress here. Everyone says, what do? I say, do something. Within the bounds of the rules, and I do agree we need more standardization, but we cannot afford to wait either.
Yeah. I mean, Graham, what do you see now from your sort of position of meeting so many different fintechs? What do you think the challenges are in the future now for the industry? I mean, we've talked about the need for, on the green agenda, but how about AI? Come on, the dangers of AI. Should we get into that for like 2 minutes? I mean, I'm sure we can solve it, right?
So we've been doing the lab for 10 years now. We started it off the back of kind of some of the financial crisis where the question was, what is FinTech? And it was more of an educational piece. And we thought we'll run it for a couple of years and then probably done. It wasn't done. It then became, crikey, these FinTechs are going somewhere. They're going to take us over. And then it became, actually, no, they're not. We could work with them. And it's just continued to evolve. And I think it will continue to evolve again. I mean, AI, you could put in that frame as well. Like, it hasn't just started to be a conversation today.
Absolutely not.
And every year when we run the lab and we survey the 30 plus clients for like what's the challenges that they're facing, it's not how do I adopt the latest in ChatGPT-4 into my customer services center in a responsible way. It's how do I make decisions with data more effectively? Because to Alex's point, like there's so much data. It's in so many different places. Customers are calling out for personalization. If you can do that at scale, there's a cost efficiency there. So I think there's a reality of like, what's the actual problem of today that we're trying to fix versus what's the super exciting next horizon, where's it going? So some of that is super exciting and very engaging and it brings the ideas to the table, but I think we also need to fix the fundamentals quick.
Okay. Alex, what do you think to that?
So I did a philosophy degree and I left university thinking that was irrelevant. And it largely has been. But suddenly it's super relevant. And actually we study these issues, and I'm quite old now, and 20-something years ago. So the regulatory, all of the thinking that is required to implement a regulatory framework is 20 years old at least in academia. Obviously its idea of how it might have panned out doesn't quite match to the reality, and we're still a long way from sentience and all the things that we were talking about back then. But there are lots of really, really bright people who have done PhDs in this and are still doing PhDs in this and more, who work across industry and academia, who are ready to answer that regulatory framework question, who are far better placed than myself. But so the sense I get is that it absolutely should be regulated. We had this conversation previously. You know, I started a web design agency in 1999, and had we had a bit of regulation, we would have avoided .com booms and busts. Crypto, had it been regulated, would not be in a crypto winter. And I think we've got a real opportunity to step in with, and it's just common sense, rules-based. You know, it doesn't have to be draconian in writing the detail. It just needs to be, don't be stupid with this stuff, and ideally legally enforceable. And people will be idiots, but they can go to prison. And then off we go.
Yeah, so it's the flip side of the purpose, isn't it, really, that we're talking about. Quick time for like a question, if anybody's got a question. I know there are people with microphones. This gentleman in the front row, conveniently. Do you want to say who you are? That would be great.
Chris Holland from Loughborough University. If you look at the energy consumption of data centres, which underpin almost everything that you've just outlined, AI, big data analytics, they consume a huge amount of energy, and it's one of the fastest growing areas. What are the implications and consequences of very high energy use by data centres and what can be done to mitigate the effects of this energy consumption in the context particularly of climate change?
I think
Yeah,
Alex,
so
we touched on before.
So there is an active conversation right now about rethinking the way that we generate and distribute energy across the UK. So, you know, the ideal solution is that to build a data center, you should have to have sourced a renewable energy provider or providers. It needs to be somewhere connected to the grid, in a place near renewable energy generation with appropriate battery storage facilities, the ability to pull energy off the grid when renewable sources are perhaps in a downturn. You know, ideally the market would drive that, right? You know, if a major financial institution said, we are going to commit to, in the next 5 years, only use carbon neutral data centers, the data center providers would scramble to find these solutions. And it's all there. All the different bits are out there in the economy, people willing to do this. It just needs the shift of capital. You know, that is a major infrastructure investment, many millions of pounds. But I don't know if you hear from when I talked earlier, it's a huge levelling up opportunity. Yeah, so that renewable energy generation doesn't happen here, it happens in the regions. If we can get the internet connectivity and the grid connectivity to the right places, you can solve those data center problems. But it needs a statement, a huge shift of purchase behavior combined with a huge amount of investment capital to actually fund the infrastructure.
Wouldn't it be great if by the end of this conference we had that sorted? I mean, they're all here, aren't they?
Get in a room.
Exactly. We've run out of time, but listen, thank you so much to my panel. Thank you as well for the question, and thank you all for listening. It's lunchtime, everyone, so go and enjoy it. Be back here at 2 o'clock.